Okay, everybody, I wrote you a grown folks Bible story. It is a twist on your formerly read Bible stories. It's made for grown folks. Take what you want, leave the others. I don't need anybody bashing me over this story, but please understand how this story can impact us from today's time and standards. So let's talk about the first booty call, y'all. I'm going to read you a story about the first booty call. I bet you never heard a Bible story quite like this. Picture it. Jerusalem, ancient times, on a warm moonlight night. King David was chilling in his palace, enjoying the cool breeze and the view from his rooftop. Now, David wasn't just any old king. He was a man of God's own heart. But even a great king can fall when temptation calls. As David looked out over the city, his eyes landed on Bathsheba. She was bathing, her silhouette glowing in the soft light. She wasn't doing anything wrong. She was minding her own business, performing a ritual cleansing. But David, he couldn't look away. Desire gripped him. And before he could think twice, he sent a servant out to find out who she was. The servant returned, probably hesitating before he told him. She's Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah the Hittite. That should really have just been the end of it. She was married after all, but David's desire had taken over him. He sent for her anyway. When the king calls for you, what you gonna do? I bet you she was confused. Uh-oh, what does he want me for? When the king summons you, what can you do? Bathsheba had no choice. Refusing the king just wasn't unthinkable. It was dangerous. So she went. Maybe she thought it would be a quick conversation or some kind of formal request. But when she arrived, David made his intentions very clear. And in the quiet of the night, the king and Bathsheba shared a moment that would change everything. The next morning, Bathsheba slipped back home, probably hoping the whole thing would just disappear like a bad dream. But oh no, it wasn't over, not by a long shot. A few weeks later, David got a message that made his heart skip a beat. It was from Bathsheba, and it was just 3 words. I am pregnant. Now David's mind went into overdrive. This wasn't just a messy situation. This was a full-blown scandal in the making. Bathsheba's husband, Uriah, he wasn't even at home. Nobody's going to believe that's his baby. So David had to hatch a plan to protect his reputation. Otherwise, his whole entire reputation would be in shambles. So David hatched a plan, a bad plan. He sent for Joab, the commander of the army. Send Uriah home for a little R&R. That's a little rest and relaxation. When Uriah returned, David played the general host. Oh, come on in, Uriah. How you doing? Uriah was a little bit upset or scared. He was like, why did the king call for me? I don't even understand why he called for me. David just kept on going. Hey, you've been working hard out there on that battlefield. Why don't you go home and spend some time with your wife? David was hoping that Uriah was going to go home and spend some time with his wife. Didn't happen. David did not understand how loyal Uriah was to not only his troops, but to the king. He was saying, hey, I can't go home and be with my wife while my other fellow military army men are out here serving and fighting in this war. So Uriah didn't go home. David tried to get him drunk the next day to see if he would just go home, get with your girl, man. I'm trying to cover this up. I'm trying to make sure that everybody think that this is your baby and that it's not my baby. So they had a good time, partying it up, drinking. Uriah, he said, "Not going home." Uriah didn't even do that. Uriah just laid out in front of the courtyard. So now David is like, "Man, I done told this man to go home, be with his wife. I'm trying to convince him, he still won't do it." So now David has to even get more devious in his planning. At this point, David is desperate. So now he has to do the unthinkable. He wrote a letter to Joab and had Uriah take it. Did you know that in that letter was Uriah's own death sentence? Uriah was so loyal that he didn't even open it up and read the letter, carrying his own death sentence. So in a letter, King David told Joab, "Hey, while y'all fighting and you in the thick of battle, pull back. Leave Uriah sitting out there by himself so that he can go ahead and get killed." And that's exactly what happened. Bathsheba, she sat at home, staring at her growing belly, torn between anger and grief and disbelief. The baby just wasn't any child. That baby was the king's. The king's. And yet here she was alone. Her husband dead. Her life is in shambles. When David first sent for her, she didn't even have a choice. How can you refuse the king? That wasn't even an option. People talk about power like it's a crown, but for Bathsheba, it was a weight that she had no say in carrying. Sure, everybody in Jerusalem whispered about how handsome David was, how strong and charming a man he was after God's own heart. But Bathsheba knew a whole different side. She hadn't been thinking about him like that. Yeah, sure, he was cute and all, but she was a married woman. A married woman. She was content, or at least she had been. But then a knock came on the door, changed everything. Her husband, Uriah, is gone, killed in a battle, or so they said. Bathsheba wasn't stupid. She could put two and two together. Uriah had been a loyal soldier. He had been a good man to her. He didn't deserve to die. And for what? To cover up the king's mistake? She didn't know whether to cry or scream. Her anger simmered as she thought about David. He ruined my life, she thought. He took everything from me, my husband, my home, my peace. And now she was carrying his child, a baby that would forever tie her to a man who turned her world upside down. Bathsheba knew she couldn't raise this child alone. A single mother with no husband, no income, no support. That was a life she wasn't going to bear. She wasn't just going to let David walk away scot-free like nothing happened and leave her in this mess. She wasn't going to sit quietly and let that happen. So she sent word to David to come visit her. David got to her house. She didn't even mince words. She told him, "You're going to marry me. I'm not going to sit in this house widowed, raising your child, no way to provide it for it. And you caused this, David. You caused this and you owe me. You owe me and this baby that I am carrying." David looked at her, probably feeling a mix of guilt and fear, because Bathsheba wasn't playing. He'd been so caught up in covering his tracks, he didn't even think about what this had cost her. Bathsheba wasn't just some woman he could charm and forget. She was grieving her husband, carrying his child, and demanding accountability. Bathsheba continued, "You think I wanted this? I wasn't sitting on that rooftop dreaming about you. You was furthest from my mind. I was living my life, loving my husband, staying in my lane. But you couldn't leave me well enough alone. You saw me. You wanted me. And now my whole life is ruined. This booty call, David, your booty call has cost me everything." David couldn't argue. He knew she was right. This just wasn't about him anymore. He had sinned. He had sinned against God. He not only sinned against God, he sinned against God, Bathsheba, Uriah, and his people, the people that he was supposed to lead. So David did what Bathsheba demanded. He married her. He brought her into the palace. But even as Bathsheba moved into the grandeur of the royal household, she couldn't shake the emptiness. Her heart was heavy with the loss of Uriah. Her heart was heavy with the loss of her innocence. Her heart was heavy with the shame of her circumstances and the reality of what her life had become. And that's when God stepped in. Nathan the prophet then came to visit David, told David a little story about a poor man who had one little bitty lamb, but he loved that lamb. He cared for it. He took care of that lamb. He just loved it. And what happened was a visitor came to visit the rich man. Instead of the rich man taking one of his lambs or one of his cattle, he ended up taking the poor man's lamb and slaughtered it for his guest. David got upset. "Oh no, why did he take that poor man's lamb? He only had one lamb. That man deserves to die. Matter of fact, make him pay back 4 times the amount that he did for taking that poor man's lamb." So Nathan told him, "Hey man, check this out. That's you. You're the one that took that poor man's lamb. You went over in Uriah's house. You took his one little you. You took his wife, man. You tried to hide it up. You murdered her. You got her pregnant. You forced her into adultery. And that's you." David said, "Oh my God, I've sinned. I sinned against the Lord." David fell down to his knees and he begged for mercy. All right, guys, I hope you guys are enjoying this grown folks Bible story. Hopefully you get an understanding of how booty calls can really find you in a pot of hot water. Think back to your first booty call. What was the fallout behind it? What did you learn? Stay tuned. Let's see how David tries to overcome this situation. How he tries to redeem himself from taking this poor man's lamb. Let's look at how Bathsheba comes to terms with how she felt with this whole entire situation. There's more to come. Stay tuned. Bye, y'all.